All right, everyone, welcome back to part two of our running podcast with myself and Coach Ryan Power. So, hopefully, enjoyed part one. Lots of good pieces in that. And we're going to change up the format of this one a little bit on part two. And versus me just asking Ryan some more bland questions about training philosophy. We're both actually coming off some solid races since the last podcast. I snuck in a little 250 marathon and then only to be outshone by Ryan and his 112 half marathon that he dropped in Kingston. So I think we're going to use that as kind of the basis to talk about his philosophies because I think his training block leading up to that, from what he shared with me, is encompasses a lot of what he believes on the way. So Ryan, how you feeling after your big 112, man?
Yeah, feeling good, and thanks for having me back. I feel like mine still pales in comparison to you running a really solid marathon and then immediately getting in the car and driving like 40 hours across the country. I'm beyond impressed that you were able to do that. If nothing else, but to be able to like compartmentalize like the stress and everything and really focus well on the race. So well done on that. But yeah, no, I'm feeling good. I was really happy with that, with the whole build leading into it and then how the race went. Like really couldn't have been any happier with it. So I'd love to dive into a little bit if it can help, answer some questions or give some insight into the why or the how for what we were talking about on the last episode.
Well, I definitely don't recommend my recovery protocol of 4 days in the car because I felt still horrible by the time I got out west. So, do not recommend that. That's a do not do. But it had to be done. I had to go out with a bang in my Ontario time by ripping the streets of Mississauga. So it was well worth it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Oh man. All right. So maybe let's jump into it instead of, like I said, instead of jumping, just going through like training philosophies, maybe you can give us a bit of a run through of like how you sort of thought about your training block, maybe talk about where you were coming into it and kind of how you set up your periodization from it, from anything from the intensity to volume side to give us a taste of what it'd be like working with yourself as a coach.
Yeah, this training block, I thought it'd be kind of fun to share it because it encompasses again a lot of what we were talking about on the last episode, but it was also just kind of a neat little block of basically four-week cycles that really kind of, if I were to boil down my overall philosophy with running and training, this was it. And I mean, this is part of why I love coaching and coaching myself is the learning experience. And so I really threw everything that I've learned in the last 5 years of self-coaching into this training block, which ended up being fairly condensed in about 16 weeks. But yeah, I think it's just a good example of first off what I know works for me, but really the philosophies that I bring to coaching all of my athletes and really all distances. There are pieces of all that in there that kind of touch upon it. So yeah, I mean, so I guess the start of this training block was at the end of last season. So I ended up racing pretty late into last year, um, mostly because I was off all summer with a broken collarbone. But I ended up racing cross country nationals that were here in London at the end of November, and so that was kind of the end of my 2024 season as it was. And so essentially, this training block started um, shortly after that. So after ACXC, which was a fun but very hard race, I took a week completely off of running, actually pretty much completely off of all exercise, because actually really believe in doing that, taking some dedicated time off of especially running if you've been doing a long build and a long season. It's good for bone health. It's good for overall hormonal health, just to give your body some time to actually recover before you start ramping things up. So um, essentially the month of December last year was really my off season. So about a week completely off and then 3 weeks just gradually building back, just getting some frequency back first and then slowly building back the mileage. And what that looked like was essentially just 3 weeks of slowly getting back to about 4 to 5 runs a week. And all of it was easy for a full month. And the last couple of those weeks, I started including a couple stride sets. So 4 times 15-second fast stride type of thing a couple times a week, which again, we touched upon in the last episode, but again, strides are really valuable for improving or maintaining running economy, your overall running efficiency. And it's also a really efficient way to get a little bit of speed to maintain your kind of top end with really very little training stress associated with it. So that's kind of my go-to in off season is cycle back to the really easy stuff and then a little sprinkling of really fast stuff. Because that allows the nervous system to continue kind of firing and staying efficient without um, without very much training load overall. So I guess that was the start of the training block was just getting through off season. But another addition that I made this winter, being very fortunate to work with LP Endurance now, was adding the strength training sessions that are tailor-made for our endurance athletes. So those I really feel were really critical in allowing me to be healthy, be strong and fit throughout this whole training block. And honestly, by the end of it, putting in more consistently more weekly mileage than I've ever been able to before with absolutely no injury risks or niggles or anything like that. So I really credit the strength training as being a critical aspect of that. And just for a little bit more context, I kind of mentioned that last summer I was off with the collarbone fracture. So I'm still identifying mainly as a triathlete, but swimming and biking are slowly coming back to what I'd like to be doing. So I'm still swimming about twice a week, still riding 2 or 3 times a week. So through the whole winter and early spring, I was still doing a little bit of that. Um, and in particular, at least one really hard like VO2 max focused bike workout per week, whether that was a specific set or a virtual race, something like that. So that's kind of the overall foundation of what things were looking like. Do you want me to just kind of get into like the specific training blocks that I went into through the new year?
Yeah, I love that. And even in just thinking about that base period you talked about, I know people can get hung up on a lot of like pace or heart rate and stuff like that, especially early season where you like almost on purpose took maybe a little bit of a fitness dip. What was kind of your guide during that base season of kind of your easy running? Is it a certain just like RPE you're targeting? What does that look like?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think if you're able to, as an athlete, develop that just tool of tuning in internally to know what feels right, that's definitely the best guide. And so that's also my guide in terms of when I know that I need some downtime as well, is just really kind of looking inward and trying to get that sense of knowing when you're kind of, I think we've all been there, where you're in the last couple weeks of a really hard or a long training block or long year and your mind is just screaming for rest. And that's always an indication that you're probably pushing the limit of what you can do physically before that starts showing up in your body with an injury or with illness or something else. And so I knew that I definitely needed a break after ACXC. Um, and then in terms of getting back into it, yeah, I mean, definitely RPE is the main guide of how fast or how slow I'm running. But just to put it into context, if I'm going out the door for an easy run, especially in off season, usually it's with friends or with my wife or with the dogs. And I do that kind of on purpose for the social element, but also to really be intentional with how slow I'm running. So I would say an average easy run for me in that period would be let's say about 50% of my 5K speed. So take whatever your 5K, if you're a 20-minute 5K runner, double that. And that's kind of what I'm doing for my easy run. So really, truly, ridiculously easy. Because in my opinion, there's no such thing as too easy when it comes to those workouts. And for a lot of people, depending on where they're at in their running journey, taking or adding 2 or 3 minutes per kilometer to your 5K pace, that might be a brisk walk for some people. But the truth is that's probably where you need to be if that's the case, to be at the appropriate effort so that you're absorbing training properly, that you're getting the fitness boost that you need, and you're hitting the purpose of what that training cycle is supposed to be. And so, yeah, for me, there's no such thing as too easy. If I'm shuffling at 7 minutes per K out the door, then great, because I'm moving, my body's getting used to exercising again, getting back into the routine. And so definitely using an internal guide, but within the context of many years of not doing it right and knowing now that you can have confidence that you can go really, really slow for those slow and easy runs, whether it's an off season or a recovery run during the season, whatever it may be. And you're getting the training you need out of that. You're getting the purpose, you're achieving the purpose of that without having to worry about, losing any potential fitness gains from going faster. So um, just wanted to kind of highlight that.
And I feel like even more so when we get out of that base season, if you're an athlete that's truly like working hard in some of those key workouts, you like want some of those easy runs to like be so easy and you are so happy to have those. I was just thinking yesterday, I'm kind of getting back into it again. I did like a more of a top end anaerobic workout in the morning because that's what I need right now. And there was a local run club here in the evening. And it was like I was running close to 3 minute per kilometer on some of the reps in the morning. And then I ran 6 minute average pace for that. And I was like, I would not want to run any faster than this on this double today. Like my body is so happy right here. But people are always thinking like, yeah, I just got to push that easy a little bit harder. And that's what's going to make me better. So definitely good to hear that you feel that way as well.
Yeah, and the way that I think of it is your body knows duration. Your body knows how long you're out exercising for. Your body doesn't necessarily know how many kilometers you're running in that time. And it really doesn't care either. And so if your goal is to, in your case, get out for an easy afternoon shuffle after a hard workout in the morning, then you just think, okay, what is the purpose of this? I want to get out. I want to just get some blood flow in my muscles again. I want to loosen up and I want to feel better when I finish than when I started. And so if you do that and you just forget what the pace is and say, I'm going out the door for 30 minutes or 40 minutes, whatever it might be, and you truly convince yourself that it doesn't matter how far you go in that time, then I think that allows you to tune in a little bit more to listening to what the body's telling you. And as much as all of these training gadgets and methodologies and everything else are a big part of what we do, being able to listen to your body and listen to the cues it's giving you of what it needs at any given time, that's the really critical tool that you won't reach the pinnacle of your athletic journey until you're able to do that. And so yeah, that's a big one for me.
Yeah, well said. All right, cool. Let's roll into your next kind of couple blocks leading into the half now.
Yeah, so this was I wrote this in a way that on paper I thought it looked good, and as probably all of us know, it rarely works out that way. But this one happened to go pretty much according to plan, and so the way that it worked out and why I wanted to share this was I essentially wrote 4 4-week blocks starting at the beginning of January, and then this half marathon was the end of April. So it's just kind of a neat and tidy 4 month cycle leading into this first goal race of mine for the year. And so the way that I broke that down was the first 4 week block, which was roughly the month of January. Again, I just come off season, and so my priority coming out of off season is really hitting the top end of my speed and capacity. So I'm really targeting essentially like mile, 1500 and maybe 3K speed in my workouts. And so what that looked like was I was running on average 5 times a week. And at the beginning of January, I was at about 60K and progressed that to about 70K by the end of that 4 week block. And as I mentioned, the focus and the intention over those 4 weeks was really my top end speed. And so for the most part, anaerobic intervals. So really short, mostly under a minute for those intervals, but just reinforcing that the running economy, the running efficiency that we've talked about. Um, and so I would say if I had to pick out one key workout from that first block, the one that I liked the best was it was 4 rounds of 400 meters at about 3K pace, 90 seconds rest, and then 300 meters at 1500 pace. So again, 1500 pace, we're going pretty fast for us distance runners. Even if you're regularly touching on these fast intervals, 1500 pace is not that far off of sprinting, um, especially in the context of building for a half marathon. Um, and then 90 seconds rest, and then 200 meters at 800 meter pace. And so again, not a full out sprint, but just controlled enough that you can run it well. You can run it with really good form and nice and relaxed, but essentially as fast as you can go while staying relaxed and staying smooth. And so 4 rounds of that. So it ended up being a total of probably 12 minutes of really high end work. Again, at the very top end of the O2 max kind of output and borderline anaerobic. Again, so that training block, my focus was I want to get my top end speed as high as it can go, knowing that from here on out for the rest of the year, I'm not going to be running that fast. And so the idea was let's get my ceiling as high as I can now, and then I've got a lot of room to work with below that. And then for my long runs through that first 4 week block, it was still mostly unstructured, just kind of building the mileage back. I started including some kind of steady intervals, so upper zone two or maybe touching on marathon pace intervals, but they were still pretty relaxed, nothing too long in terms of sustained efforts. And I also included a lot of hill reps late into my long runs. And so the idea with that one is trying to build in a little bit of fatigue resistance by a bit of a speed and a power stimulus at the end of a long run like that. Um, but really most of that training block, very, very highly polarized. Um, I would say 90 to 95% of that training block I was running in zone two or below. Just building back some volume for a good foundation for the year and also sprinkling in that top end speed. And at the end of that block, I actually started looking for track races because I thought I'm in really good 1500 shape. Like I kind of want to see what I can do for one right now. But anyone who's run on an indoor track, which I was doing a little bit this year, knows it's pretty high risk in terms of potential injury and overuse with just how tight the 200-meter track is. And so I didn't want to get too excited, but so I didn't end up signing up for anything. But that was the goal, was by the end of January, get in really good 1500 shape, because to me that's going to be the foundation for kind of what I'm going to layer on after that.
And curious question for you. I know I did a run with you kind of in your final block before the half marathon, and at that point you were doing some doubles, and I'm sure we'll get to that section. Were you incorporating any double run days in that part, or there a certain like mileage threshold you have before doubles make sense? Where does your head kind of go on the topic of doubles?
Yeah, doubles for me, they're definitely something that I like to incorporate. And for me, it's not even necessarily a matter of trying to get a bunch more miles in, although sometimes that is either a side benefit or part of the reason I do it. In that block specifically, my overall run volume, at least for me, wasn't crazy high. And so I wasn't doing any doubles at that point. But kind of the two reasons that I like incorporating double runs are number one, frankly, as an amateur athlete who has a full-time job, sometimes it can be hard to fit, say, a 90-minute hard workout at some point in the day. Either you're up really, really early to get something in, or you're running, at 5 o'clock after work, and then you're running well past dinner time just to get that in. So part of it is frankly just to split up the miles. And so for me, during that training block, I'm fortunate enough that I'm able to do some of my workouts on the indoor track at the university where I work. And so I would fit a run workout in on my lunch break, but I'd be maxing out at 50 or 55 minutes and then 30 seconds to shower and get back to my desk kind of thing. And so in those instances, which I started doing later in the spring, part of it was that my goal was to get approximately X number of kilometers in on the day, and splitting it up was the only way I could logistically do it. Um, and and the other reason that I like incorporating doubles is, especially on a workout day like that, finishing a hard workout, and you often will feel tired and stiff and everything after. I personally find that getting out the door for 20 or 30 minutes, I would say minimum of 3 or 4 hours later, I actually feel way better after doing that second run. I just feel looser. I feel ready for the next day again. And I think if you've never done a double run in your life, that will probably feel pretty terrible the first couple times. But I actually find it helps with my recovery too. And so when I'm in kind of my heavy training block and try and max out, not necessarily max out my total volume, but I know I've just been doing this for long enough now, what when I'm kind of reaching and what my maximum sustainable kilometers per week are. And when I'm getting relatively close to that, that's when I start incorporating double. So part of it is to split it up time wise and to split up the effort. And part of it is that honestly, I feel better after getting that second run in. But this first block within the build for the half, I wasn't doing that yet. My total mileage wasn't super high. And overall, there for me, there's definitely give and take between the total amount of miles or kilometers you're doing in a week, and then how much intensity you're fitting in that week as well. And so I knew that for my run workouts, although they weren't, really hard grinding threshold sets, I was still asking a lot of my body at, 36, 37 years old to be trying to hit 200-meter reps at 800-meter pace. Like I know that there's a bit of risk involved in that. And so I didn't want to be asking my body to do these really fast, quite challenging intervals and kind of linear build of my overall volume too. So the total run volume during the week wasn't super high, but I was doing some pretty fast stuff in the week. And then I started to kind of shift that balance over the course of the spring where I want my overall mileage to start going up to prepare for the demands of a half marathon. And I'm a little bit less concerned about what my 1500-meter time is, but I start becoming more focused on aerobic capacity and VO2 max and things like that.
Nice. So what did your blocks look like leading after that? We'll keep progressing from your big anaerobic 1500-meter heyday here.
Yeah, so that more or less got me into February, and it just kind of happened that it worked out this neatly month by month. I certainly don't try to plan it this way. I'll always start with where the race is and then kind of work backwards from there. This one, it just happened to work out kind of naturally that I had kind of a mesocycle of 4 week build that covered each month. So February, I progressed the overall volume a little bit. So I think I started my first week of that block was 68K and then it went up to about 75. And so I'm not progressing by much. And I totally just did this by feel and what felt like the right amount per week. I hadn't written in really firm targets of total volume. But the run workouts started changing a little bit. So I was still focused on pretty high end speed, but I was getting into the more classic VO2 max intervals and so focusing on the 3K to 5K type of speed, which I really think is the foundation of any no matter what run distance you're targeting throughout the year. Um, I like to cycle back to this type of 3K and 5K speed where you're really hammering in, I guess from a technical or coaching standpoint, your velocity at VO2 max, but essentially how fast you're able to run over a 3K or a 5K, so 15 to 25-ish minute duration. I think if runners focused on that a little bit more throughout the year, no matter what distance they're running, they'd probably find that they're faster at every distance. And so this is really my bread and butter when I'm getting into these intervals. So one of my kind of staple workouts within that block was 7 rounds of 800 meters on about 2 minutes recovery, and so really focusing on my 5K speed for that. And it's not super long rest, and so it's not an all-out effort. Like 2 minutes recovery is a close to a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio. So enough rest that you should feel relatively fresh, but you're definitely building fatigue throughout that workout. And just for context, I think I averaged about 225 for my 800s on an indoor track for that one. And so that one was a good indication for me, having done this many times before, that I was getting pretty close to very good 5K speed for me at that point. And so hitting those 1 to 3-ish minute intervals on a decent amount of rest, that's really my bread and butter for anytime I'm not focused on a specific event. I cycle back into that kind of 5K speed focus. Because if you're doing it correctly in terms of your pacing and total time you're targeting at intensity, it shouldn't break you down too much. The workouts will feel pretty challenging during, but they're still not super long. And you shouldn't be be pushing yourself to the point that you're breaking down mechanically within those like 2 minute intervals. Otherwise, you're just doing them way too fast. Um, and so that's the kind of training that I think you should be able to do essentially all year round if you wanted to, without injury risk or worrying about burnout or overuse and those types of things. Um, and then just to finish off that block, the long runs, I started going a little bit longer, so progressing to 90 minutes, hour 45 type of thing, but with a fair bit of solid work in them. And so I started including a lot of sustained tempo intervals, some progression runs within there. And the last week of that block, kind of my final long run of that block, I was starting to taste the half marathon kind of effort and suffering. Because the last one was it was about a 25K run. And within that, I did 3 by 5K descending. And so I started at um, essentially kind of Ironman or like call it 50K pace. So kind of upper zone two, and then progressing down to half marathon effort. So the third 5K, I ended up going 16:39, and that was about what felt like the right effort for kind of midway through a half marathon. And after that one, I knew that, okay, speed is good. I know I've got some good pop in my legs. Now I just need to kind of build that out so I know I have the strength to hold that over longer intervals. And so that was February for me. Again, that to me that's my absolute bread and butter kind of running formula is uh, a hard VO2 max focused run workout where we're trying to target our 5K speed, a long run where you're incorporating some controlled but challenging tempo intervals, and then kind of as much easy running as you're able to kind of fit in throughout the week while keeping it kind of sustainable and not risking any injury or anything.
Yep, love that. Yeah, that's one spot I felt like I kind of went wrong if in kind of years past I would just kind of go back to that like threshold tempo development, but now more and more it's going back to that anaerobic all the way to like that 3 to 5K stuff is like such a huge foundation to push that ceiling up, especially guys like ourselves who have been in it for a long time. Like the base of our pyramid isn't the issue. It's like we got to keep both maintaining and pushing up that ceiling, or it's gonna fall on us and we're just gonna get slower and slower as we get older. Versus, look, you're still getting faster and running PBs at the old age of 37, 38.
Yeah, I'm turning 37 this year, so but yeah, no, truly I've never been I mean don't have any plans of running like a 3K or a 5K j yet this year, but I'm pretty confident that I'm still getting faster at every distance. And a big part of that is that focus on the speed and the output at VO2 max. And so I know that that's kind of a technical term, but really what we're looking at is how fast you can run for these 1 to 3 minute intervals. That again, if you're doing them right, and you can really do it by feel, that you want to be running them just fast enough that you're not breaking down, you're not losing your form towards the end of it. They're definitely going to be uncomfortable, but you're able to hold your good form and stay relatively relaxed throughout those intervals. Um, and as you know, I mean, for it's I still think it's funny thinking of us as aging athletes, but like the traditional approach to running would be that in your late 30s, you're well on your decline already. And that's just absolutely not the case. And there are definitely things like it is true that your VO2 max will start to decline as you get into your 30s and 40s and into your older years. But um, there's a lot of interesting research coming out now that a lot of the age-related decline that was just accepted as this is just, sorry, the inevitability of death. You're on that slow spiral down. It's not necessarily, yes, there are some physical factors going on, but a big part of what was being measured in that age-related decline was just that people stop doing things. People become less active as they get older, and even people who are active tend to gravitate to the longer distances. And so again, that base of the pyramid, the foundation is really good. But if you're not continually stoking the flame of that top end speed, yes, you will get slower. But on the flip side, if you are continually kind of pushing that top end speed and building your power and your efficiency, you can maintain that a lot longer than what people had previously understood to be true. And I mean there are tons of examples of that in the running world. And I mean I'm happy that I can be an example of it in my own little way that 10 years ago I never would have expected that I'd still be progressing at running. I thought by 25 that was it, and it was just all downhill from there. But if you do it right, if you build a thoughtful training plan and really look at what are the kind of the building blocks of what I need to continue achieving what I want to, then it is possible to continue maintaining speed or building speed much longer than anyone previously thought possible.
Yeah, pretty cool, especially for somebody like yourself who's still competed at a high level in triathlon and stuff in his 20s, that he can still be finding stuff late into your 30s. So that part's pretty cool. Let's continue on to our next block after that. So things are starting to get pretty spicy there in February. We still got March and April leading into the race. Let's see what you had in those blocks.
Yeah, I'll try not to go on too long about these, but again, I think I'm not sharing this necessarily because I think what I did was right or the best thing, but I think it does encompass just a lot of my overall philosophies that I believe in as a coach and as an athlete. And so yeah, into that third kind of 4 week block within this within this build. I started including my double runs at this point, so I was starting to push out um, the maximum of what I knew I could sustainably do in terms of total weekly mileage. And so for me, I know anytime this is just from past experience, and I think um, if you're not sure where you're at as an athlete, it's just kind of a learning experience and takes time and years to kind of understand what works for you and when you're kind of pushing a little bit too far. But for me, I was roughly targeting 80-ish kilometer weeks. And since my overall swim and bike volume are a little bit lower this year, I found that I was able to progress to about 90K at the end of this 4 week block. And so to do that, I had to start incorporating some double runs. So on my workout days, I'd often squeeze in an indoor track workout on my lunch at work. And then at the end of the day, I'd do a 30-ish minute shuffle just at home. Again, super, super easy, but I always feel better after I do that than beforehand. There was one, so this wasn't like some flawless build the whole time. I actually got sick during that month too, but I was relatively lucky in that I missed one hard run workout day, but I was still able to get most of my easy miles in for that week. But again, anytime there's something like illness or potential injury risk comes in, health always has to be the priority. And so I wasn't going to take any risk with that. But I was relatively fortunate that it was just kind of a bit of a head cold that after a few days it started easing up. And so doing easy running was felt okay. But the focus again for that block was still really prioritizing my 5K speed and then starting to build that out to kind of a 10K focus as well. Um, so starting to get closer to that kind of those threshold or those more traditional run workouts that a lot of us are familiar with. So things like kilometer reps or the peak kind of workout for that block was which is a big staple for me when I get into the kind of heavy lifting of aerobic fitness was 5 by a mile at roughly 10K effort. Again, I'm going by effort more than anything else on this. And actually, I had to do that workout on the treadmill because I think the footing was like horrendous that day. I mean, it was horrendous for a lot of us in Ontario this year. I don't think I've ever had a year quite like this where most of my athletes were stuck on the treadmill just week after week after week with bad footing, like dangerous footing, ice on the ground, things like that, where it's just not worth the risk. And so again, running on the treadmill, I'll always take the speed with a grain of salt. But for that workout, I knew that things were going pretty well because I did them all at 12 miles per hour, which was the fastest my treadmill would go at about 1% grade. Again, I didn't care what the time or the pace was. I wanted to internally feel what 10K effort felt like, and that felt like the right effort. And so it just worked out that way. And then for the long runs, I was definitely at this point, I was, 4 to 8 weeks out from the half marathon. So I definitely wanted to start getting the body and mind prepared for the demands of the half marathon. And so I started doing some pretty half marathon specific intervals within my long run. And probably the key one for that, or at least the biggest long run within that block was I did about 30K. This one was outdoors, about 30K total with 12 kilometers at half marathon pace. And so this one became a little bit infamous with a couple of the athletes that I coach who were also targeting half marathons and running races. That when you see that workout on paper, like go run 12 kilometers continuous at your half marathon pace, it looks kind of daunting. But really, when you break it down and think to yourself, when I'm 12 kilometers into my race in the half marathon, I shouldn't be totally blown up yet. I should still be relatively controlled. This should still feel pretty good. And so, knowing that you're not going to this workout tapered, it'll be maybe a little bit more challenging. But 12K at half marathon pace to me is if you aren't able to do that, or if that feels way too hard, then that's great because now we know that that probably isn't sustainable for another 9 kilometers. And so for me, it's a little bit of a test set just to make sure that, especially through the winter, while so much of my training and for a lot of us was indoors, it was just kind of that first initial calibration to know that, okay, my treadmill is relatively accurate, or my indoor training does in fact translate to outdoor running. And so for me, when I ran that workout, I had a rough idea of what I wanted the pace to be, but for me, it was more about go out, go and do the effort. What feels appropriate for 12 kilometers at what I hope to sustain for another, you know, 30 plus minutes after that. And you'll know if you're honest with yourself, you'll know if that feels good or not. Um, and so that was a good one. And I was still hitting, things like the 3 by 5K. I think did 3 by 5K at half marathon pace. So I progressed that from a descending effort to just 3 by 5K at goal half marathon effort slash pace. And so, yeah, definitely getting into the heavy lifting in that third 4 week block leading into this one.
Nice. Those are some spicy ones. So we're talking there, that's March, so you still have about 4 weeks to go to the race at this point?
Yeah, and so April was a little bit interesting because I had the bright idea of backing up this half marathon with the trail 50K 4 weeks later, which I'm in the kind of the final prep for now. Which again, on paper, might seem ridiculous, but my theory with this was that if I get through this half marathon, I'm going to be in very good aerobic shape. Like my threshold, I'll essentially have spent the first 4 months of the year getting my threshold as high as it can possibly be. And what better place to go and attack a 50K than from there? I'd rather do that than spend 6 months, you know, uh, playing around on the trails. I mean, I love doing that, but if you're doing it for to get the most out of yourself, then what better way to try to check off all of the kind of physiological variables that you can in training, and then kind of turn your sights on the specific demands of a hilly trail race like that. So anyway, so in April, it started to cross my mind that I have these two goals that I'm working on kind of simultaneously. So I started balancing that a little bit. So I did a couple of my long runs on the trails in April, and I was still doing pretty challenging run workouts within those long runs, but just getting a little bit of a kind of a change in pace. And I think it was also valuable to just get a little bit more of that strength stimulus, getting some really hilly long runs in, things like that on the trails that I truly felt that that's still gonna be a nice thing to kind of have in the bank when it comes to this half marathon. And so again, I was around 80 to 90K weeks, which again for me is really pushing the max of what I've ever been able to consistently do. And I credit that to definitely the strength training with LP, but also just listening internally to making sure that I wasn't trying to push myself to a specific target each week, but just put the kind of the pieces of the week together, and that's what it ended up being. So again, was doing doubles on my workout days and my long run days. For the long run, doing the doubles for me is more about not wanting to have one super, super long run um, all at once, because personally, I believe once you go past about 2 hours in a long run, especially if you're doing some pretty challenging intervals within that, to go any longer, you're really not getting a whole lot of benefit in terms of more endurance adaptations, but there's definitely a high risk of just mechanical breakdown and fatigue and injury risk by going longer. And so I was still maxing out my long runs at 2 hours. And then if I wanted to go longer, I'd add 20 or 30 minutes later in the afternoon on that one. Um, and again, at this point, I had kind of progressed from focusing on mile speed through to 10K speed. And so this last block, I was kind of just looking for those last little incremental gains. And so this is where I was getting into a handful of workouts where I was starting to push pretty deep. Most of my workouts, even like mile reps, like I did in the block before this, they're still relatively controlled. And maybe the last 400 of the last couple mile reps are pretty hard, but I was never like really digging to the depths of my soul. Whereas I dug to the depths of my soul a couple times in this block. Again, just having that internal guide to make sure I'm not doing anything too stupid. But my favorite workout of this block, and this is probably my favorite overall run workout, is called the Michigan. And so there are a few ways you can do this, but it's kind of an infamous workout in the running world, at least in the track and cross country world, where you run a mile at 10K pace, and all the rest intervals are just a 200-meter jog. So a mile at 10K pace, 200 jog, 2 kilometers tempo at roughly half marathon pace, 200 jog, and then it's 1200 at about 8K pace or 5 mile pace, 2K tempo at half marathon, 800 meters at 5K pace, which at this point is you're deep into the workout, and 800 meters at 5K pace is pretty challenging. Another 2K at half marathon pace, and then a 400 essentially as fast as you can run. And so about 1 mile pace. And so that one's a total of, oh, it's over 10K of total work. And that's definitely a very heavily lifting workout that essentially my 4 months leading into this had built me up to the point of even be able to complete that workout. Um, but that one I really like that workout because you're kind of hitting two things at the same time. You're hitting your really high end speed, but you're also spending a lot of time at that upper tempo half marathon pace, to the point that running 2K at half marathon pace almost feels like recovery from the fast intervals. It doesn't actually feel like recovery, but you can kind of convince yourself that it does. And so, yeah, very heavy lifting on that one. And then one of the key long runs I do with this one, which is probably equal parts mental prep as it is physical for the demands of a half marathon, and like drawing upon your strength and your speed late into a run or late into a big effort, was I had about a 26 or 27K long run where it was a short warm up into 5K at goal half marathon pace, straight into 10 kilometers steady at it's not quite marathon pace, but you could call it 50K pace or upper zone two kind of heart rate, and then straight into 5K at half marathon pace again. And so it's 20K total of work, and you're bookending that with 5K at your goal half marathon pace. So this is another one where in that second 5K, you're really going to find out if your goal pace is realistic or not. And it's not a matter of putting yourself in the grave to hit a certain pace for those. It's go with what at this point I'd spent 13 or 14 weeks building to this, to what I thought my pace was going to be for this race. And you'll find out in that second 5K if it's going to be feasible or not. And I did that workout, felt really good throughout. And I kind of had a pretty good sense of what I'd be targeting pace wise for the race at that point. And so I did that workout as well as that Michigan midweek workout in the same week. I think that was 2 weeks before the race. And so that was really where my total mileage, but also total amount of intensity peaked for this half marathon. And then I kind of started tapering from there.
And then talk us through a little bit of the taper. What was your strategy there in terms of the volume intensity side of things to make sure that you didn't bleed all that hard work, but kind of absorbed a bunch of it and came in fresh to be able to run a 112.
Yeah, the taper is it can be a tricky one, but probably one of the most misunderstood parts of running and triathlon training in general is kind of how to craft the taper. And when first started working with athletes, I was shocked at what some people considered it to be appropriate. Like I'd worked with some athletes who were training for a sprint triathlon, and they'd say, "Okay, so 4 weeks out from the race, we're going to start tapering." But I think that was really like a kind of a mindset a lot of people had for a while. And my approach to it is for most distances, I'd say everything um, from like a 1 mile up to a 50K. I won't probably two weeks out from the race um yeah, 2 weeks out from your actual race is probably going to be my hardest week. Where like every other week, I'm not going to take any risks in terms of digging a hole, but that's where my biggest training load is probably going to be is that 2 weeks out. And then from 1 to 2 weeks, I'll start dropping back the total amount of volume, but I'll maintain the intensity. And so maintaining the intensity from, let's say, 5 to 14 days out from the race, I think is a really critical aspect that a lot of athletes miss, because you want to keep again just stoking that flame of the top end speed and your VO2 max, because that's what is going to drop the fastest if you're not doing it. But you also just want the nervous system continuing to fire with that speed. And so the week out from the race, so say 10 days out from my race, I still did a pretty challenging run workout. And the total distance and the intervals themselves were a little bit shorter. I think I did a couple rounds of 1200, 800, 400 that were getting progressively faster. And so definitely a fair bit shorter than what I'd done the week before. But I was still pushing those pretty hard and trying to run them pretty fast. And then the week out from the half marathon, I did about a 90-minute long run with some time spent at half marathon pace, where I'm not necessarily trying to get any more fitness out at that point, but I'm still getting the body and mind just accustomed to race intensity and just the speed that I'm going to be doing. And so I think my long run 2 weeks or 1 week out from this race was 2 by 3K at half marathon pace, which at that point felt pretty relaxed. And then I did some uphill strides at the end of that one just to get a little bit more of a strength and a neuromuscular stimulus. So nothing too crazy, but still I ended up doing, I think, about 65 or 70K that week out. And so the total volume drops a little bit, the total amount of intensity drops, but definitely still incorporating some speed and some faster stuff that week out from the race. And then race week again, continue dropping the total volume pretty dramatically at that point. But even three or 4 days out from the race, I like to do just a little dose of speed, just so that the body and mind remember what to do and the nervous system stays firing. And so I like to do just a few, say, 90-second or 2 minute reps at your goal race pace, whether that's a 10K or half marathon, where it's feeling pretty relaxed at that point. You're getting a little bit of a dose of speed, but we're certainly not pushing the body. And that week was interesting for me because, and I think this is just a lesson that can apply to anyone. I think it was 3 or 4 days out from the half marathon. I had like a 30-minute easy shuffle on my schedule, and I did it after work, and I cracked like 15 minutes into this 30-minute shuffle. And I was like, oh my God, I'm getting sick. I've totally buggered this after 4 months of great training. And I basically shuffled home and immediately went to sleep. And and I felt horrible. But I mean, I've been doing this long enough now that I didn't panic, because it's not the first time that's happened. And tapers can be weird, even if you're doing everything well, and even if you're um, doing what you should be doing in terms of training, you may not feel very good 3 or 4 days out from the race. And I finally started coming around. I knew that my overall training load was dropping. My muscles were feeling fresh, all that. I just physically, I just didn't feel that great until probably 2 days out from the race. And then I started really feeling like, okay, I know that things are starting to come around. I've shed all this fatigue from the training block, started pounding my carb loading a day or two out. And but truly it wasn't until the day before the race. So the Saturday I went and did a 30-minute run with some strides. And then I really felt that like, yeah, okay, I've got this. I'm ready to rip tomorrow. And I always tell people I want that Saturday afternoon before, or if your race is on Saturday, Friday afternoon, I want you to feel like the Kool-Aid man, where you can just smash through the wall, like you're ready to just destroy people. That's what we want the day before the race. And so
Yeah.
I was feeling really good by 24 hours out from the race, and was really excited to hit it hard the next day.
Oh yeah. The Kool-Aid Man, Ryan. Final two pieces I'd love to touch on to finish the block here. Pre-race warm-up. So what would you do for something like a half marathon, and how would that maybe slightly differ from a 5K or a longer distance like your ultra coming up?
So for this one, I did my pretty standard warm up for really most distances is I did a kind of a 10-minute started with just 10 minutes of jogging where I started super slow. Again, 6 minute K pace, so like 50% of 5K pace. And over the 10 minutes, gradually build that up to kind of a steady or zone two effort. And then I do two or three strides, 15, 20 seconds where I'm progressively getting a little bit faster for each one. And then I like to do so for this one I also included 1 minute. So I did the two strides and then I did 1 minute at kind of half marathon effort. And the reason I do that is I often find in both in my workouts but also in races that first minute if you haven't done a good amount of activation leading into it, it feels like your heart rate just skyrockets right away and it's
Yeah.
hard to get your breathing and everything under control. So I like to do just 1 minute at race pace to get the body and the mind and all the nerves just kind of set for the race itself. And then a couple minutes of super easy jogging before getting to the start line. And so the way that I would adapt that, if I was doing a 5K, for example, I'd want to come in a little bit hotter. And so I might add 5 or 10 minutes to that easy jog beforehand. And maybe I'll do two times 1 minute at goal race effort, just to make sure that the muscles and the nervous system are really firing for a super hard, short effort like that. And then certainly for anything longer, the warm up is going to get a little bit shorter. So for if I was doing a marathon, for example, I might do just 5 or 10 minute jog and then maybe one stride or 5 or 10 minute jog and then that 1 minute at race effort, which should feel pretty relaxed, but just kind of getting the body and mind kind of centered for it. For a 50K, I don't know, I'll tell you in a couple weeks. But you probably don't want to spend too much unnecessary time on your feet. What I'll probably do for that is maybe a bit of band exercises just to get the muscles warmed up. Maybe a few minutes of just shuffling around. And I actually find for me, I find I need to get kind of my calves and my Achilles warmed up a little bit too. Otherwise, they just kind of get pumped out pretty quickly if I just jump into an effort. And so a little bit of jogging around can help, or even like some skipping and things like that, and a little bit of dynamic stretching like and things like that can be helpful. So certainly um, there's an inverse correlation between the distance of your race and how much warm up you're going to do. But yeah, for the half marathon, it was probably 20 minutes total, whereas a gradual aerobic build and then some strides and then 1 minute effort at race pace. And then I was feeling really good at that point and was ready to go.
And then approaching the race from the like effort wise or pace wise, how did you think about that? Did you break it into like equal parts and be like, I'm expecting to feel this way in a certain part? How are you thinking about your kind of pacing slash RPE strategy for the race?
Yeah, this is definitely where I would say the training comes in really valuable, not just for the physical preparation, but also mentally to know what to expect. And so being able to draw on those workouts like the 12K at half marathon pace, I that gave me a really good sense of what I should feel like at 1 kilometer, or what I should feel like at 5K, and where I hope to feel at 10K into the race, and giving yourself a little bit of wiggle room on one side or the other of that. But really, I was tuning into what I knew I could sustain based on the workouts I had accomplished leading into this. And I think in our part one, I mentioned the idea of setting your race goals based on how your training is gone rather
Mhm.
than setting your training based on how you want your race to go. And this was absolutely the case. And this was an interesting one for me, because I had done all these workouts where these, especially those long runs, a big part of it was just getting the body and mind comfortable with what race effort should feel like, and becoming confident in that. And when I did some of those workouts, um, I hit some times where I thought, yeah, there's no way. Like there's the treadmill must be wrong, or I must have just felt really good because there's no way that I'm gonna target that in a race. I'm asking for a catastrophic blow up. Just with the paces I was seeing at some of these workouts. And uh, and I had kind of extrapolated that to know roughly, okay, I know that this pace felt totally sustainable for that 12K at half marathon pace, or my 3 by 5K at half marathon pace. I know what my paces were for that, but when I extrapolated that out to the total time of the race, I thought, yeah, no, that seems ridiculous. I'm not worrying about that. But it really just forced me to tune back into just the process of it, and knowing, okay, I know that from these workouts, I knew that anywhere from 328 to 330 per K, I knew I could do it. I was very confident that I could do that for the duration of the half marathon. And having done those workouts, I knew that if I pushed it a little bit faster, if I hit a 325 or 326, that I could just t tell internally that that was a little bit too much, that I wouldn't be able to sustain that. And so going into the race, I really still didn't have a super firm target of pacing in mind. And I definitely didn't have much of an idea of what that overall time was going to work out to. But I had a very good sense of internally what I knew was sustainable, what effort was sustainable for me over the duration of that. And pretty quickly into the race, I just settled into about 327 per K. And um, I wasn't overly concerned if it was plus or minus a few seconds. But the whole time I just knew that, yep, this feels like the right effort. I'm very confident that I can sustain this effort. And it was a fairly challenging course, and it's quite windy that day. So there were certainly some slower kilometers, mostly on the way out, that I just wasn't going to panic about. I wasn't going to force myself to run, that 327 on a few of the Ks that were uphill and into a pretty stiff wind. I just tuned back into the effort of knowing what I could sustain. And then on the way back, I was able to get the time back on those slower Ks. And so the way it worked out, I essentially just held 327 per K the entire almost every kilometer split was 327. I even split almost to the second. Each of my 5Ks were plus or minus like 5 seconds. And so I think I was just very tuned into the effort I knew I could hold for the duration of the distance. And it still didn't really dawn on me until probably the last kilometer of the race. I looked down on my watch and thought, holy crap, I could probably get into 112s if I stay on this. And coming from, again, I think we talked about this in the last the part one. I am absolutely not some prodigy runner. I never was. I'm just totally a normal guy that has been doing this for 20 years and hasn't been afraid of these hard workouts for 20 years. And I remember running a half marathon probably 10 years ago now, and the winner of that race ran 113. And just that number was so mind-boggling to me that I thought I'll never be the 113 guy. That's just not who I am physiologically. And so I got to 20K into the race and looked down at my watch and thought, holy crap, I might be able to go 112. And that was like kind of mind blowing. for me personally, and I got through in 1:12:42, and I was really thrilled with that. And it was again just I think the it really reinforced for me focusing on executing your training and setting your goals for the race based on how the training has gone rather than the other way around. And that was all the proof that I needed for that, that I ran a time that I never expected I'd be able to run, but all of my training indicated I was very capable of doing it. I didn't believe it. And so obviously it can go the other way too, that sometimes things don't go the way that you hope, or you sign up for a race and the training, it just isn't, you're not hitting the paces you hope you would. But no matter what you do, I mean, you'll get fulfillment from being confident in getting the most out of the training that you were able to do leading into the event. So whether it was a personal best or not, I was just thrilled that I executed a race to the absolute limit of what I felt my training capacity would allow for. And really, the time is secondary to that. I was thrilled that I knew I had trained well for it. I knew kind of where the target was, and I was like smack in the middle of that target. And for me, that was more fulfillment than any time would be. And yeah, so I was really happy with how it all went overall.
Yeah, that was impressive. And then fueling strategy, what did you use for that? We'll keep that one pretty quick because there's a few other questions I want to knock off before the end, and I think we're just over an hour, so we gotta in this day and age, people's attention spans are probably even though there's so much good stuff.
Yeah, I'm already talking way too long.
No, not
But
even. This is
no, so
great.
this one, I carb loaded really heavy for this one. I've never finished a race and had a sugar hangover before. I I love sugar. I love sweets, and I was OD'd on sugar after this, just from carb loading pretty heavy, knowing that I was going to be drawing pretty heavily upon my glycogen stores for this. I was going to be going into the well for this race. And so I wanted to knock off all variables that I could. And so even so, the morning of the race, I was slamming sugar, a bunch of oatmeal and banana for breakfast, and was sipping on sport drink with electrolytes for the hour or two leading into the race. I had a gel about 20 minutes before the race, so I knew I was really topped up. And then within the half marathon, I had two SIS beta fuel gels, so those are each 40 grams of carbs, so 80 grams of carbs over. I think I took the second one around 17 or 18K, so 80 grams within the first hour of the race. Um, and yeah, there wasn't much more of an opportunity to get more in than that. I took the first one in about 30-ish minutes, the other at about 60. I didn't have a firm schedule for this one. I was just kind of basing my intake on how things felt in the moment. Um, but I got both of them down, and I had a few cups of water throughout the race at the aid stations. Um, but that was the extent of it. I was glad to get both of those in just to feel really topped up throughout. And energy felt really good for the duration of it. So uh, yeah, that was it.
Yeah, great choice on the gels. Those are my favorite too. I cranked 6 or 7 of those in my marathon and felt like I still needed like one or two more. I wish I'd brought more along, but those gels are just so crushable. And like anybody who I've swapped over to them, like rarely has any GI issues and can up their carb total so much. So can't recommend those gels enough.
Yeah, yeah, they're amazing. I mean, that would certainly be a better question to pose to you, because I think for a half marathon, especially uh on say a 110 to 120 half marathon, you certainly want the carbs coming in. But the actual intake and the schedule is a little bit can be a little bit more flexible than what
Yeah.
you'd have to do for a marathon. And so
Yeah.
yeah, the beta fuels though, they're the way to go, I think. Just keep slamming those.
Yeah, even Jess, who ran Vancouver the week after and ran like 254 for her race, I think she had as a whatever 60 under 60 kilo female had like 7 of those beta fuels during her race. So that's like almost like 90, close to 100 grams an hour. So like that stuff works. And she was so strong all the way and recovered quickly. So This stuff,
Yeah.
if you do it right, especially for those long races, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, I mean, I won't get into too much of the research because this could be a whole topic on its own, but I mean, a big part of what your brain creates to become your rate of perceived exertion is your brain is doing all this monitoring and calculations while you're out running, um, and it's calculating how quickly you're burning through your glycogen stores, and it will tell you how hard your brain will tell you how hard the effort is based on extrapolating when it thinks you're going to run out of fuel.
Mm.
And so you may not even use all of the carbohydrates that you're putting into your stomach, but your perceived effort is going to be a little bit lower because you slam those 40 grams of gels and your brain immediately, before it even hits your stomach, as soon as it's on your tongue, your brain senses, okay, fuel's coming in. I don't have to be quite as worried about fuel running out. And so I'm going to turn down the alarm bells just that little tiny notch. And there's some really fascinating things that are going on just automatically in your brain when it comes to that stuff. But again, we won't get into that. And I'm not an exercise physiologist, so I don't want to butcher the research on it either. But it's pretty interesting stuff for sure.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. All right, I got a little quick fire section here, so we'll try and aim for like, I know you'll want to go longer on these, but 2 to 3 minute answers maybe on a couple of final topics here. I got four of them that I'm curious to get your take on because it's ones that people struggle with or I get a lot of questions on. So first one, shoe rotation. Is that something you believe in, and what do you kind of believe on the carbon shoe side of things in workouts and also for races? Like, is there a certain pace threshold? So I know it's a tough one to keep it tight, but it's let's see what we
I,
can do anyways.
Yeah, I love shoes. There's my answer.
Yeah,
No, in
I got a
terms of
few.
the carbon plated shoes, again, yeah, this could be a big topic, but what I'll boil it down to is, yeah, anyone who's used the carbon plated shoes, particularly, I think we're talking about the carbon plated shoes plus the super foam because it's that
Yes.
combination that kind of gives the magic to those race shoes, the super shoes. But I do like incorporating super shoes a little bit. I definitely have a shoe rotation of usually 3 or 4 pairs that'll include a cushioned easy mileage shoe. I'll definitely have some trail shoes in there. Usually my quote unquote workout shoe is a pair of last year's race shoes where I've put
Yeah.
100 or 200 kilometers on them. And I know that there are several hundred more Ks in them that I'm still going to get good protection and good cushion from. But maybe I want a fresh pair of race shoes for this year. So I'll usually use carbon plated shoes about once a week, and I'll usually reserve those for my workout days. Because again, those are probably the runs where you're asking the most of your body. There's the most potential strain. Um, but but the interesting thing with that is they feel good because they reduce the pounding a little bit, and so you're not getting beat up as much. But I think there's probably an interesting detraining effect to that a little bit too. And so when I use the carbon plated shoes, I'll use them in the context that maybe I'll do one more rep than I would if I was in trainers, or maybe I'll try to go 5 or 10 seconds per K faster than if I was in some trainers. So I'm achieving the purpose of the workout that I wrote it for, um, and still recovering well, but not making sure I'm not missing out. And so I mentioned that because I think you definitely don't want an over reliance on the carbon plate and the super foam because it feels really good. But this is more anecdotal, but I think there's starting to be some research come out on this as well that you my feeling is that you'll start to lose some strength in your feet and the kind of the connective tissues in your feet and your Achilles because they're being deloaded a bit, that you're not going to get something for nothing. And so I like to do the vast majority of my mileage without carbon plates, but I'll certainly throw them on for those fast workouts, where you want to replicate what the feeling of the race will be, and you don't want to be super destroyed after either. So yes, definitely to shoe rotation. Yes, a little bit to carbon plated shoes, but I try to limit it to once a week maximum on those.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you've seen much in the research, but like athletes that you coach, have you found that there's a I still don't even know what the correct answer is on this, but is there like a pace threshold that people are running where they actually get benefit or don't get benefit from carbon shoes?
Um, Personally, I don't think so. I think the much bigger difference on than speed, which no one really talks about, is the actual geometry of the plate and
Mm,
the density or the durometer of the foam they're using. I think people's strides react very differently to different
yes.
shoes. Um, and so I think there are definitely shoes that whether the manufacturer intentionally designed them to be maximally efficient for a marathoner who's 105 pounds and is running 440 miles. Um, Maybe those types of people will respond best to those shoes. I do think that everyone benefits from these in a similar way to like carbon wheels on your like deep dish wheels on your bike. Everyone's going to benefit from them a little bit. And to that analogy, people who are out on their bike for 7 or 8 hours in an Ironman actually stand to gain a more finite amount of time from aerodynamic gains than someone who's going 4 hours flat, even though the percentage might be a little bit different. So I think just my intuition is that there's probably something similar going on with shoes that I think
Mhm.
everyone benefits from them. Um, but I definitely think it's worth trying if you can a few different options. And honestly, the easiest way is just to put them on and just try them on in the store and walk around, and your body and your feet will tell you if it's comfortable and if it feels good or not. If you have the means to do some quantitative testing between shoes, then great. But just that intuition of putting them on, what feels the most comfortable, what feels most natural with your stride is a pretty good starting point if you can't spend 3,000 bucks on a stable of super shoes.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. And I've even noticed just different iterations in the same brand. Like the Alpha 1s are always my favorite shoes from Nike, and the Alpha 3s. I'm just like, feel like I'm sitting back and I'm so slow at them. But then I got the Endorphin Elite 2s and I'm friggin' flying forward with those things. So just know, yeah, people go to a running store that carries a bunch of different kinds. Like we use Runner's Choice in Waterloo, and they carry a bunch of different brands. And
Hmm.
you will not regret doing that because you're going to find the brand and the iteration within that brand that works best for you. So definitely check that out. All right, next question. From a high level part, what is some things you do differently for like your 40 plus athletes?
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched on this a little bit before, just in terms of minimizing age-related decline. But certainly for athletes that I work with who are 40 plus or 50 plus or 70 plus for some of my athletes, I start with, I start with just I'll treat all my athletes the same in that the most important thing is to gather feedback from them, to listen and to look at the workouts that they're doing and adjust them accordingly over time. But in terms of a starting point for an older athlete that I'd work with, I'll start with thinking, okay, what do you lose in age? And we talked about losing your output at VO2 max. But what do we lose with age? So we lose muscle mass naturally. You do lose your VO2 max over time, although a lot of that can be mitigated by trying to hit that in training. And certainly, as you age, the recovery period becomes a little bit longer after hard workouts and things like that. And so, the real foundation for older athletes for me, which honestly apply to myself at this point, is strength training. Absolutely critical. Like the older the athlete I work with, strength training becomes even more important, and I'll prioritize the strength workouts in their week more and more to make sure that they're not missing them, that there are no excuses to hit those have to be the number one priority. Um, and then also in the workouts themselves for running, again, what are we losing? As we get older, we're losing speed and we're losing power naturally. And so let's continue reinforcing that all the time. So that generally looks like a highly polarized training plan where the easy stuff is very easy. And when we're going fast, I want them going very, very fast. because we're trying to mitigate those inevitable physiological losses. But you can limit them a lot more than what we had previously thought possible, as we were talking about earlier. Um, so those things are really critical for me when I'm working with older athletes. And so overall, as I'll do with all of my athletes, I'll get a sense of what their capacity is for overall volume and things like time at intensity, rest intervals, and I'll certainly be a little bit more calibrated with older athletes to make sure that we're really just trying to target the minimum effective dose of total volume of time spent at intensity and things like that. And so the number of intervals might be a little bit lower, or the rest intervals might be a little bit longer relative to the hard intervals. But other than that, I don't treat my older athletes all that differently, other than really hammering in strength training, really hammering in sleep and nutrition, all these things that are going to help you with your recovery as they become a little bit more harder to achieve as athletes age. But the foundation of it isn't all that different. That I want you building speed and building power or maintaining it as long as you can throughout your life, because that will help a 25-year-old runner a lot, and it'll help a 40 or 60-year-old runner even more to always be prioritizing that and not letting those things go. I think again, a big part of the decline we see with older athletes, aside from people just stopping exercise, is in general, I think older athletes tend to gravitate to the longer distances. Um, and that's just from years of experience working with athletes and just looking at population numbers. But if we can convince them that the speed is really the key to staying strong, staying healthy, and being fit over all distances, then that's even more critical for older athletes, I think.
Cool. And final question that I'd love to approach, because I've had some spirited debates with a few people post-marathon season on what is your thoughts around pacing strategies for like marathons? I'll use some examples. We just had this spring, Boston, Toronto, Mississauga, that have like a first half with a fair amount of downhill and then maybe a little bit flatter or more challenging back half. What do you kind of approach for a pacing strategy for one like that? Are you big fan of the bank time or hit even or negative splits, or where do you fall on the spectrum for that one?
Yeah, I had a couple of conversations with a few athletes over the last few weeks as well about this, not specifically about Boston or say the Toronto Marathon, but even something like the Mississauga Half Marathon, the new
Mhm.
course where the first half is all downhill, and then the second half you climb back up to the start again. And my philosophy with that is do not bank time, bank effort.
Yes,
want
thank you.
I want you to get through halfway feeling more fresh than you normally would, because you can bank time, you can run those faster kilometers in the first half, but you're just smashing your muscles. The eccentric loading is so high on that if you're trying to even split your effort, your muscles will explode in that second half of a race like that. And so I try to tell people get through the first half feeling more fresh than you otherwise would, so you can significantly ramp up the effort in the second half, rather than trying to bank time where you go through the halfway well ahead of your target pace, but you've probably done a fair bit of damage to your muscles in the process of doing that. And then you don't have the ability to maintain the effort or maintain the speed after that. And that's where I think of a lot of cramping and the epic explosions in Boston tend to happen. Uh, and certainly addressing it in training too. So when you're getting those final weeks of the really race specific workouts, if you're running Boston or if you're running Mississauga, start incorporating some pretty gnarly downhill running intervals,
Mhm.
because your body will actually the muscles will actually adapt quite quickly to eccentric loading like that. Um, and will protect against future muscle damage by incorporating things like that. So go find some long, steady downhills in your training, and alternate a mile uphill, mile downhill, things like that, where you're exposing the body to prolonged periods of time running downhill, and you're probably going to be pretty sore the first time you do it, but you're much better to do it in training than you are in racing. So, yeah, do it in training, and then when you're in the race, bank your effort, don't bank time.
Yeah, I've found for most people like 3 to 4 sessions over a block, like spread out, with that kind of eccentric downhill loading is like pretty much all you need for something like a marathon. Get some like pace, some or marathon effort sort of time out a few of those downhills 3 or 4 times where you log some decent time. That's pretty much all you need. That's what I did this time, and I had screwed up with Toronto the first time I'd done it, and I went too fast in the first half and didn't do this eccentric loading, and I was screwed by 18K. Changed the recipe for Mississauga where I did, like you said, bank the effort through the first half, did this eccentric loading stuff, and my quads were fine the whole way. So I'm glad we're on the same page on that one because I've so many people who didn't have good results on this were trying to like debate me on this. And I'm like, look at the people who ran well in these races. They literally did this strategy I'm talking about. And it's not this like um I think people get messed up because they're like, oh, I left some out there. Then if I like negative split this course that had a downhill in the first half, it's like, no, you just decided how to use your battery in a different way and slowly zapped it in a different way where you got to push and pass people at the end and keep winning. And yeah, I had a girl
Yeah.
negative split in Boston, which just like was blowing people's minds. And it's like, yeah, she
Yeah.
got to win by passing 1,000 people in the final couple K because, and that's only going to get more momentum versus dying a horrible death.
Yeah, I mean that was very impressive. Yeah, we should have your athlete on here to tell us how she did that because she might be the first person in history to negative split the Boston Marathon. I mean, I've never run Boston, but I've never run a road marathon, but
Yeah.
I've gone longer and I've gone shorter. But yeah, it's very difficult to do that. It takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of confidence and
Hmm.
in yourself and in your training to be able to do that. Um, but yeah, it certainly makes for, I think, a more enjoyable race experience, but also a better result to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just a matter of having that self-control, having the confidence to know that you can close strong. And as you said, it's just a matter of dosing out or spending your pennies throughout the race in a different way. It's not a matter of spending more or less. But yeah,
Yeah.
you kind of demonstrated that very well with this a super strong marathon. And your athlete Madeline had an amazing race in Boston as well. So yeah, two good examples of that don't bother trying to bank the time because it will come back to bite you.
Yeah, you can't risk it. Like a marathon is such a razor's edge event. Like you can risk it maybe a little more in a half or a 10K, but marathon is such a hard race to do that. And your quads and legs are going to get destroyed if you try and do it the other way. Awesome. Well, holy crap, we covered a lot on that episode. Let's wrap it up there, but I'm sure we will do some more episodes in the future. Thanks for joining me, Ryan, and we'll have you on again soon.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Sorry I talked so long, but I love talking about this stuff and I appreciate the time. So happy to join anytime and enjoy the rest of your day out in the mountains now.
Oh, yeah. Plan to. Have a good one, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.